Since teaching from the early days of Liberty Hyde, since teaching is based on research, we are always glad to cooperate with people in other research projects. Incidentally, what do you think this sounds like? Believe it or not, that noise was made by chimney swifts going into the chimney. The banding of chimney swifts is an example of such a cooperative research project that we mentioned before. Naturalists are able to learn where birds go in winter and what routes they follow in migration by catching live birds on their legs and then releasing them. Number and is made to sit fish. The Fish and Wildlife Service at Washington, D.C. is in charge in the United States. The service supplies official banders throughout the country a band. As one of the many phases of their work, they encouraged banders to cooperate in banding large numbers of years in an effort to learn more about these valuable birds. And the banding of almost 375,000 swifts before they got a single band to show where the birds spend their winters. Then in 1944, not one, but 13 bands were recovered from Peru. And at last we knew that these small birds fly all the way to the headwaters of the Amazon, down in the country of the headhunters, for their winter vacation. However, nothing else has been learned about their winter homes, so the Fish and Wildlife Service is still anxious to have swifts banded, hoping that others may be recovered in their winter quarters, in addition to learning more about their migration routes and habits here. That's why some of the Cornell students decided to try to band the huge flocks that roost in the big chimney in the main building every spring. Just from looking at that chimney, I'd say it was quite a trick. How about it, Pauline?
We had been told that it was impossible, but when a flock of several thousand swifts began roosting there last May, we decided to go ahead and try it anyway. The chimney itself wasn't our main problem. Of course, we couldn't use the standard traps ordinarily used in swift banding because of the way the chimney is constructed and located. So we built our own of hardware cloth. It was 3 feet long and about 2 feet square. In one end, we made an inverted funnel of wire so the birds couldn't fly back down the chimney once they got into the trap. Then, of course, we had to make another opening in the other end so we could get them out to band them. Actually, making the trap was about the easiest part of the banding operation.
Well, after you got the trap made, you had to cover the chimney, didn't you? And how did you get to the top of it?
Robert Dickerman, one of the undergraduates in the agricultural college, helped me. In fact, I never could have got the work done at all without Bob's help. He did practically all of the chimney work. We had to borrow equipment for that. We got a large canvas from the paint shop and ladders from the electricians and carpenters on the campus. And from there on, it was our show, or rather the Swifts. It was the 12th of May before we got everything together. That night, the birds circled the chimney for more than a half hour. People walking across the campus stopped to watch them in their skillful flight. The entire flock was in the chimney by 8:45 p.m., but we didn't dare try to cover it before 10. By that time it was dark, and it was our first attempt, so it took us 2 hours to get it covered. We agreed that it was a good thing it was dark, or we'd never have been able to do it. Even then, it wasn't simple to haul a double extension ladder up from the roof below and get it extended and in place. After that, we had to get the canvas spread over the chimney and fastened down. The chimney was so big that we couldn't tie the canvas on, so we used long 2x4s borrowed from the carpenter shop to hold it in place. Of course, they had to be carried over from the shop, then carried up 5 flights of stairs and out on the flat part of the roof. From there, we took them up more steps to the platform on the roof and then down the steep slope on the other side and up the ladder to the top of the chimney. There really wasn't any danger. We just had to get accustomed to the idea of working up there. All the time we could hear the swifts twittering and occasionally flying around inside the chimney, so that encouraged us to go ahead. We finished covering the chimney by midnight, and then I opened bands until 2 in the morning. When you're banding swifts, you don't have time to open bands as you work.
If it was that much trouble to cover the chimney, how did you ever get the birds out? Did you put the trap up that night?
No, we got started about 7 o'clock the next morning. After picking up Bryna Kessel and Irwin Lane to help us, We had the ladder up already, so that was easy. Then it was fairly simple to tie a rope around the cage and haul it up to the top of the chimney. After that, all Bob had to do was push the canvas back from one corner of the chimney and put the funnel end to the trap above the opening. The rest of us stood around on the platform and waited, but nothing happened. Finally, a couple of us had to go down the 5 flights of stairs to the sub-basement and flash a light up the chimney and beat on a board with a hammer, and that did the trick. By the time we panted up the 5 flights again, the trap was almost full. But Irwin insists he won't help us next year.
Well, you got the cage of birds down the same way you got it up, and it must have been a lot heavier with the birds in it.
Yes, it was, and it was a lot harder to get down with 500 birds in it than it had been to take up empty. We had quite a time getting it up the steep slope of the roof to the platform above the flat roof on the other side. Finally, from the top of the chimney, Bob threw the end of the cage rope to Irwin on the platform and let him haul it in hand over hand, while Bob himself walked up the gutter between the 2 sloping sides of the roof, carrying the cage full of birds. Bob's 6 feet 2, and to see him walk up there barefooted and blue jeans well rolled up, balanced only by the taut rope as Irwin pulled, was not only amusing, it was nerve-wracking. The day was cold and it rained steadily. But once we got the cage full of birds on the flat roof where we had plenty of room to work, we didn't mind much.
Well, chimney swifts are funny little birds. Their body is short and cigar-shaped, and their long, slender wings cross above the tail. The tail itself is so short that you hardly notice it when they're flying. But when you see them close up, the sharp points that stick out beyond the feather tips are tiny, but their claws make up for that in sharpness. When you've had one hold to your hand or your shirt, you can understand how easy it is for them to cling to the inside of a chimney. Their feet are small, but they have extra large mouths, and they need them too because their diet is made up entirely of flying insects that they catch on the wing.
That's true. Their large mouths and tiny feet are certainly suited to their way of living, except for the time that they spend in the chimneys at night, and when the weather is very rainy. Every minute of their life seems to be spent on wing, chasing insects for food. Some people have the mistaken idea that these birds bring insect pests like bedbugs and lice into the house when they nest in the chimney, but that's not true. They are parasitized by several kinds of insects, but the insects live only on birds. In fact, when we're banding swifts, we often see the large lice on them, but even if the lice crawl on your hands, you don't have to worry. They won't stay there.
You told me that some of the birds you trapped had already been banded by someone else. How many of the banded birds did you trap?
We trapped 4,094 swifts altogether, and 16 of those had already been banded by someone else. That's about the percentage you expect to get among swifts. We were tickled to death to get those, and carefully copied the number from each band before we released the bird. Then we sent the numbers of the banded birds to the Fish and Wildlife Service at Washington, and they sent us a report of where and by whom the birds had been banded. One of the 16 had been banded by Ben Coffey in my hometown of Memphis, Tennessee, and 2 were from Nashville, and 1 from Knoxville, Tennessee. 5 of the others had been banded in Macon, Georgia, and 7 in Kingston, Ontario.
Well, it certainly looks as if Ithaca swifts come from all points southeast or go to all points when they leave.
Yes, it does. All of the birds from Tennessee and Georgia were banded in the fall, too, while those from Ontario were banded in the spring. One of the Nashville birds was 9 years old, and several others were 6 or 7. That's some traveling when you think of a small bird making a round trip all the way from Peru 9 times.
Well, I'll say, and it's even harder to try to imagine how many million insects he must have eaten in those 9 years. But have you heard from any of the birds you banded?
There's hardly been time yet, except for local reports. 4 have been reported coming down chimneys around Ithaca, and 1 at Venice Center. All of them were released except 1. A cat got him, but we have great hopes anyhow.
And do you plan to do more banding next spring?
We certainly do, if it's at all possible, and we even hope to band a few this fall.
Well, thank you, Pauline James.